Welcome back to Man vs. Meeple, the show where we talk about all things board game related. Today we are here with a Kickstarter preview for a game called Sailing Toward Osiris, and this is from Daily Magic Games.
Yeah, super excited because we've had a really good month of Kickstarter previews.
We have.
And this is a Euro worker placement.
Another Euro.
It's more on the gateway side than it is on the heavy Euro side, but it's still a whole lot of fun because they do a lot of unique things in this game that you don't see in worker placement.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say this comes close to reaching medium weight, light to medium.
So, you have a game board. The whole idea is that the pharaoh has died and he is sailing towards Osiris.
Yes.
And everybody is an enacting governor who is trying to become the new pharaoh. So you're building monuments in honor of the pharaoh as he travels down the river. The river is broken into 4 different spots, and they're very large spots, but each round he's going to be moving to a new spot, which lets players build and work the land in those areas and then build monuments and get points for the monuments that they're building.
Exactly. Thematically, it's very cool because as the game progresses, you're able to build near the ship or maybe away from the ship, and that has some impact on how many points you're scoring.
There's only 3 resources in the game, and the number of resources is dependent upon the number of players. The whole game scales really well. I'll say that right at the start. Depending on the number of players, there's a different amount of resources, different amount of laborers. Even
spaces on the board.
Spaces on the board are blocked in a really nice and uniform way that makes the game a lot tighter for a 2-player game compared to a 4-player game. There is monuments. There's 3 different types of monuments. Each player is going to start with 4 sphinxes, 3 obelisks, and 2 pylons.
Yes.
And your whole goal is to build these quicker than everyone else because you get points the sooner that you get them all built.
Yeah, it's definitely, you want to get those out, and like I said earlier, it depends on where you build them. As the ship sails along, you're going to be building them. There's very specific places you can place them, and you can build them along the ship and get an extra bonus point when you build them. And the building process is a little bit more than just, I'm going to build this. You've got to invest in it a little bit.
Yeah. There's also a set of city cards. These city cards have 2 functions. The top function of the cards allows the player to discard the card to gain resources that are on the top, or they can discard it for the bottom portion in order to get a special ability. And each player is also going to start with 5 boon cards. These boon cards are all the same for every single player in the game. They're used in a really unique way, though, because when you play a boon card, they're all numbered 1 through 5. When you play a boon card, say, for instance, I play the number 1 on a round, no one else during that round can play that number 1. So you're fighting to use these very powerful cards, but use them in a very timed aspect to get them all to be able to be played, because you're only going to be playing 4 of the 5. Yeah,
that's possibly. That's one aspect of the game that really changes when you have more players, because in a multiplayer game, there's very few cards. You can get stuck without playing a card during a round, and you for the most part want to try to play one of those each round for sure. Yeah, and the timing, I mean, some rounds you want to play them very early because they give you benefits, but you're also giving up the ability of doing some very powerful moves on the board. Some really good decision making, because you could hold off one more turn before you play it, and then someone else plays it before you, and then you're out of luck.
Last component, camel. Everyone has a camel, which enacts a caravan action for the players. So, at the start of the game, we're playing a 4-player game here, so there's no block spots on the board. Let's talk about the board itself. You have the river, which we already mentioned. There's 3 different types of building locations. You have farm locations, you have brick locations, and then you have stone locations. Those can be utilized by very particular workers. You have stone masons and brick masons and farmers. They can go to those locations.
Yeah, and they're really interesting because each location is sort of appears as though it's split into 2, and that is for a specific reason, but not as it relates to how you place your workers. You place your worker there, and you're able to gather all of those resources.
You have 2 spots for caravans. One north of the river and one south of the river. Each of these locations have 2 spots that you can go to. Place your camel there and become the leader of the caravan. We'll talk about that as we talk about the rounds and the actions you can take. You have a spot over here which allows you to pay 2 of any type of resource to gain more additional workers. You have a market. You have an end of the round on the bottom right. And then you have planning stages for all the different monuments in the game.
Right.
So let's talk about the actual game structure itself. It's pretty simple. At the start of the round, or the start of the game, each player is going to get 2 of every single resource. They're put behind a player's shield because knowing what other players have with resources is extremely important on the timing aspect. Again, this game is really built around timing.
Exactly.
At the start of every round, each player has to draw laborers.
That's the interesting thing about this. The laborers or your workers in this game, you don't all start with like 4 or 5 or 6 workers. Each round, you're drawing them from a bag. So there's going to be standard laborers of each type.
Yes.
You know, ones that can get clay, ones that are brick, stone, and then go to the farmlands. And then there are master laborers of each of those types. And those will come into play, we'll explain in a second, in terms of giving you flexibility of where you can place.
Yes, and there is a finite number of each of them. In a 4 and 5 player game, there are 4 of each of the laborers plus 1 master laborer. So you can start to, through the course of the round, deduce what people may have and may not have. Because also, some will be left in the bag.
Right.
Which only the first player can look at and have advanced knowledge of what people may be going to.
I love that advantage for the first player.
Yeah.
Is they get to look in the bag to get a little bit of more information. But yeah, like Jeremy said, when you draw your laborers, you keep those private and secret.
Yeah.
So I may draw all the stone, or a lot of the stone ones, so I know no one else is going to be getting stone. So that can play into how you progress through the round.
So in Secret, each player will draw 2 laborers in a 4-player game. Also, there is an X number of laborers afterwards that are placed into the labor pool. Those can be purchased, and the rest will be left in the bag. And that's, again, dependent upon how many players are participating. So one of the actions you can take on your turn is you can take one of your laborers and go to a particular location. For instance, I have a stonemason here, and he can go to one of the stone locations. Now, you can only go to work the land in the areas where the pharaoh is or behind the pharaoh. So I can only go to the stone area here.
Right. Yeah, so the like Jeremy said, the standard laborers have to stay within the realm of where the ship is.
Right.
Only the master laborers are the ones that, like I said, have more flexibility.
So my master brick mason can actually go beyond the location and farm all the way out here. You're going to gather the resources of wherever you're going to.
Right. Now, one slight change in that is with respect to the cities. The cities are another location you can go to. As Jeremy mentioned earlier, when you go to the cities, you're going to draw 2 city cards. But any laborer can go to any city on the map to do that at any point during the game.
Right. So putting a labor, you can either harvest resources, you can go to the cities, as David mentioned. When you go to a city, you draw 2 cards. You're allowed to take one of those cards into your possession, and then you have to give 1 card away to anybody at the table.
Right.
But if someone owns that location with one of their pylons, you have to give that card to that player.
Exactly.
It's one of the few locations where you can take a worker and actually go to a place where a monument, because monuments block worker locations.
Right. Like I said earlier, some of these spaces have sort of 2 sections. As monuments start to be, getting built throughout the game, they go in various locations. So if, for instance, there was a Sphinx built in one of these farmlands, I could go there later, but I can only go on the half that doesn't have the Sphinx.
Right. You can place a caravan. If you place a caravan, you take your 1 camel and you go into the top or bottom location in one of these 2 areas and you gather those resources that you're trying to collect. If a player in a future turn decides to also follow you in that caravan space, they would collect the other set of resources -1, which they give to that player that was the leader in that caravan spot. So that's putting a laborer onto the pool. Why don't you talk about how you hire extra laborers?
Yeah, so there's another spot over here where you can at any time spend any 2 resources. They can be 2 of the same, 2 different ones, and acquire one of the laborers that are out in the labor pool.
Yep.
And keep in mind, master laborers can be here. So at the very beginning of that round, when everyone gets their laborers and then you pull some and there's 1 or 2 master laborers there, it's going to be a pretty attractive spot to consider.
Do I play a boon or do I get a master laborer?
Exactly.
The other trick in this game, which I really like, as we said, there's a finite number of resources. We know that everyone starts with 2 resources in the game, and people would be collecting those behind their shield. But also, anytime you pay things to the board, especially the market and here, you're paying them to that spot.
Yeah, they stay there.
So they don't go back into the supply until the end of the round. So again, when you're trying to collect resources from other spots, there may not be resources in there to collect.
Yeah, this is definitely a game, more so than most like this, where you really have to keep an eye on those resources.
Yes.
Because not only can it come to bite you, but if you're paying attention, you can really use that to your advantage.
To hurt other players,
yeah, absolutely.
For sure. You can trade at the market. You'll notice there's 4 market locations down here. You can pay resources to that market to get the other side, and it permanently blocks that location from other players until the next round. So I could pay 2 wheat down here and get a stone, and that spot's blocked.
Or vice versa,
Or
right?
vice versa,
Yeah.
Yep. You can plan a monument.
Yeah, so the monuments, like we said, that we had the Sphinx, the obelisk, and the pylons. Once you have the necessary resources here, you can basically turn those in, and those do go to the pools.
Yep.
and then you place one of your monuments in that space. So this is still not yet building the monument. This is just planning it.
Yep.
And your monument will stay there until you build it.
That's right.
Or until the end of the round, at which point you lose that progress.
If it's not been built.
If it hasn't been built, you have to keep in mind when you plan a monument, you need to get that built in the same round or else you lose that progress.
Yes. And when you're looking at planning monuments, you'll notice that each of these monuments have a specific area on the board that they can be built to.
Right.
Pretty much obelisks can be built, or sphinxes can be built anywhere except cities, and they go down to where the pylons can actually go into the cities.
It's pretty cool, too,
themselves.
because these different sections give you different options for how you build your Sphinx, depending on what your resource management has been like.
On the flip side, you can actually build one of the monuments that you have collected. Now, when you build a monument, it can go anywhere on the board. It doesn't have to go where the pharaoh is, but it has to go adjacent to or in the location that it needs to be built in. Also, you get the number of victory points depending upon which one that you've built.
Right.
And you get an extra victory point if it is in the location where the pharaoh is. And you're going to be placing these in very specific areas because at the end of the game, there's a lot of adjacency extra victory points you get for having them built adjacent or on one side of the river or in one section of the river and so forth.
Yeah, it's very cool because that's kind of at odds with the bonus points that you get for building near the pharaoh because if you keep doing that, you're going to be spread out. But if you don't and you build up 4 monuments in a row, that can be worth some pretty significant points at the end.
Yep. You can also play a city card. As we mentioned previously, when you go to the city with the laborer, you collect the card. On a future turn, you can actually play that card either for the resources or the special ability.
Right. And like Jeremy said earlier, the other action is playing a boon card. I don't know if we covered that as one of the actions.
Yeah, as one of your actions, you can play one of your boon cards. They allow you to kind of, again, break the rules of doing something, grabbing things even out of the bag and using a labor that's not been chosen for that round. So, again, if you can start to deduce which laborers may be in there, or even if you're the first player and you know what extra laborers in there, you can dig for that guy and bring him out.
Exactly. This is all about having the information you have and kind of mathing out some of the information that other players have and using that to your advantage when it comes to the timing in this game. Because you can have some of these boon cards that are really powerful at the right time and at other times somewhat pointless.
Yeah. One of the other things you can do is you can simply pass. If you don't want to take any actions, or if you can't take any actions, you're allowed to take a marker, which, again, this is a prototype, so it's not a completely done version. You'll see some black and white printing that we place over here. But there'll be markers for each of the individual players, which will let them pass. There are 5 cartouches, of what they're called, on the bottom right-hand portion of the game. When you pass, you get those resources at the start of the next round. However, where you've placed your marker, that's blocked for the rest of the game.
Right.
So when a player passes in the second round, they can only go to the 4 that are left. And they do things like give you city cards or give you victory points or extra resources for future rounds. Once that is done, rinse, repeat. The guy's going to move forward. You're going to put all the laborers back into the pool, and you start another round.
Yeah, it has an interesting progression because as the ship moves on, of course, you can place your laborers wherever the ship is or behind it. Mm-hmm. So all those laborers that you placed early on clear off, so a lot of the spaces that had already been used are open again. Now, at the same time, there are going to be more and more monuments out there. So throughout the game, you can strategically sort of lock up certain areas, so it makes it more difficult for the other players to get certain resources.
Yeah. Victory points at the end, of course, are anything that you've collected through the course of the game. As we previously mentioned, there's a lot of adjacency rules for having things on a certain side or having certain monuments adjacent to one another. And that's it.
Yeah.
Really, this is a very strange game to explain because on the surface it looks really, really simple.
Right.
But once you get in to start playing the game, again, this is one of those worker placement games that stresses timing more than anything else.
Yeah, there's not this as a Euro even. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more wondering what your opponents are up to in this game. I mean, obviously we have these screens, so it kind of implies that. But you're really looking at these resources. I mean, so many Euros, for the most part, let you do your own thing a little bit. And this one does too, but you're really wondering what your other players are up to because you might need certain resources because you're going to do something. They're not there. So you decide to do something else. And then the very next turn, Jeremy does something that refills the resource pool with all the stones that I had just needed.
Yeah.
But now I've kind of changed my plans.
Out of it, yeah. And I imagine this is probably a good game for you too because you don't like a lot of take that in your games.
Right.
But it kind of introduces take that in a very non-aggressive style
Yeah,
way.
this is what I like to call passive take that. You
Yeah.
know, so it's not like no one is motivated mostly to do something specifically to disrupt another player's game.
Yeah.
But there's a lot that you can do for yourself
Yeah.
that will inevitably disrupt the other player's game. So
Yeah.
you can try to use that to your advantage for sure.
Yeah, I like this game a lot. It's definitely one of the best games we've played this year. It's got a lot of really cool timing aspects. Don't let the simplicity of the game fool you. Once you get into the game, I think you're going to be realizing real quickly
Right.
how many options you have on a turn and how important timing is in this game. So this is Sailing Toward Osiris by Daily Magic Games. If you guys have any questions, make comments below. Subscribe to us, please. Follow us on Facebook, like us on Twitter, and everything else that we do here at Man vs. Meeple, and we will catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.